David Claiborne, how are you?
I am well. How are you today?
I'm doing well.
Good.
Doing well. You deal with ag labor, and man, I never thought I would spend so much time trying to understand the nuances of ag labor and like what's going on with it. But it is really, really a hot topic right now because classically our agricultural industry relies more heavily on an unauthorized workforce than other industries. Okay. And I don't have specific numbers. This is just something that I understood to be kind of reality growing up in, California. And then moving up here, I come to find out that this has been a problem for like ever, right? Because we had Reagan who made some regulation changes in 1986, which, people got fined, but then they could apply for, permanent residency and continue working. They weren't citizens, but they could apply later if they wanted to, blah, blah, blah. Well, we haven't had any major revision like that since the mid to late 80s. The problem now is that over the last 4 years, we have had a real struggle with our national borders. A large influx of people have come in. States got very anxious about their inability to, deport and engage in immigration services, on their own. Arizona attempted to pass a law that got thrown down in the courts that would have given them more of the federal powers to engage in that kind of things. Texas has passed a law, and that is working its way through the courts. And Idaho is also proposing, there are a couple of bills on the table, a House bill and then a Senate bill that engage in this kind of thing as well. You are an attorney in this field and have also been engaged in discussions with these bills. Talk to me about the proposed bills in the state right now.
Sure, that's right. There's basically two bills. There's House Bill 83 that's sponsored by Representatives Jaron Crane and Bruce Skog. Original form is very similar to the Texas bill you speak of, what's called Texas Senate Bill 4.
Okay.
And what in the nomenclature they would say what its purpose is to identify, detain, and deport using state law enforcement officials.
Okay.
That is on appeal in the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. The Supreme Court has approved an order by the lower court prohibiting that bill from being enforced while it's in the courts. And then there's what's called Senate Bill 1039, Senator Anthon's bill. He titled it the Immigration Cooperation and Enforcement Act, or the ICE Act. It is not modeled after Texas Senate Bill 4, but instead has maybe three key components to it. One component dealing with making sure
I don't mean to interrupt. Do you need to check that?
No.
I know it's a working day for you, so yeah. I really appreciate you coming in. If you got to take a call.
Yeah, no worries.
Okay.
Tried to silence it.
Sweat.
So,
So the Senate bill,
the Senate bill makes sure we won't have sanctuary jurisdictions in Idaho. So sure. It has language to make sure that law enforcement can cooperate with ICE. It does create some new crimes related to dangerous illegal aliens that are in our state. It makes it unlawful for an illegal alien who's committed a dangerous crime to be in our state or to traffic them into our state. And then it deals with special provisions regarding the terms of sentence for an illegal alien who commits a crime in Idaho. And so those are two bills. The House bill advanced with a pretty wide margin, I think a party line vote, went over to the Senate. And then on the Senate side, it's kind of been hung up. Senate Bill 1039 has been sitting on the Senate floor, and what has happened is that the sponsors of both bills have got together, and Senator Lakey got involved as well, and tried to pick good parts from each bill to bring them together into one bill. And that's been done. There's been amendments. They have not been rolled out yet on the amending order in the Senate, but that should happen. I would anticipate this week, and I can explain to you what parts were taken from each bill.
Okay. I would love that. And again, so bottom line is we have one that essentially gives powers to detain, deport to the state. Right. That got something similar to that got shot down in Arizona. It's essentially in a stay right now in the state of Texas, and we're trying to pass one through Representative Crane and Representative Skog. Okay, great.
Right.
But again, similar. Well, we'd likely have similar kind of hangups to these other states. The other one has essentially trigger crimes, right? Which is if you're here illegally and you have not committed a crime, this doesn't apply as, per se. But if you are here illegally and you do commit a crime, then additional crimes get volleyed against you, as in literally you're here illegally committing crimes, and that in itself is a crime.
Right.
Okay. Like very interesting. So it just layers on. It's like, hey, look, this isn't going to affect you as long as you're a law-abiding illegal alien.
Correct.
Right. As some people find that kind of a paradoxical statement, but again, we get the point. So it layers on and enhances.
No crime committed other than the crime of entering without permission.
Gotcha. Okay. So help me understand each of these then individually, how they're getting revised and what's hanging people up.
So the compromise bill would eliminate the deportation provisions from the House bill.
Okay.
So, which are the most constitutionally challenging because, as you've mentioned, Arizona's got shot down, Texas is hung up in courts because they were trying to get the state involved in the removal of people from the country, which really is a federal function.
Okay.
So that has been that will be removed in the amendments, and instead, it will still have the crimes of what's called illegal entry and illegal reentry, but there's some sidebars put on that to say that a person can only be arrested or charged with those crimes if in the context of an investigation of a crime under Title 18 or Title 37 of Idaho Code, which those are the provisions where we deal with drug crimes and crimes against persons or property. That traffic violations are in a separate title. And so you would not be able to investigate or arrest a person for illegal presence if it was just a traffic stop, right? They would leave them alone on a traffic stop. But if they were investigating someone for theft or something and then found out in that process that they were here without status, they were here illegally, then they could be arrested on this illegal entry charge.
Okay.
And then it would also create a crime for the trafficking crime of trafficking an illegal alien into our state. Knowingly doing that would be a crime. And then there would be once a person is sentenced and found guilty of a crime, if they would get a prison sentence, right? And there's two parts to that. There's a determinate sentence and an indeterminate, or fixed and unfixed sentence. So the fixed sentence they have to serve, say it's 2 years, and then say there's 3 years after that of indeterminate. This bill would say they cannot be released on that indeterminate sentence. They can't be released early unless it's to hand them over to ICE for removal.
Okay.
So we're leaving the removal function with the federal government.
Okay.
If the federal government says we don't want them, we're not going to remove them, they'd have to finish their entire sentence and then they'd just be released. But we're anticipating the federal government's going to step up the removal cooperation. So in all likelihood, they'd be removed.
Explain that last piece to me.
Yeah.
Is right now, as it stands, say Ada County Sheriff Matt Clifford arrests somebody for a crime, let's say theft. Okay. Mm-hmm. And then he determines that this person in going through the system determines this person is here illegally.
Yep.
He can contact the federal government and say, hey, we have this person to be removed. And the federal government today, right now, could be like, nah, I'm not going to come get him.
They could say that. Yep.
And is that something that like happens?
Well, for the previous 4 years, it happened regularly. The administrative policy during the Biden administration was really relaxed, and so they were not removing people on those criminal offenses. It's changed now over the last month. ICE is very engaged in trying to take people that are being released from our jails that are known to be here illegally. ICE has very limited resources in Idaho. They only have one detention facility in Jefferson County. They've only got 10 to 12 beds reserved for them. So you can see that they don't have a lot of resources available to do mass removals in Idaho. It's really targeted. So they're looking at really bad criminals, and they're processing them very quickly now, from what I understand from talking with ICE officials. And so they're able to, once they apprehend them, get them removed quick and free back up that bed space to make more targeted arrests.
And you may not know, but how long does it take from the time when let's say ICE comes and picks somebody up from the Ada County jail? Mm-hmm. How long does it take from that moment to going to the detention facility and then being deported and having the whole process start over? Like, how many days is that?
It can happen really quickly right now. So the longest a person, let's say ICE picks somebody up here locally in Boise on some drug trafficking or something, they could hold them here in Boise for 12 hours. Then they've got to get them to a federal detention facility that meets federal standards. The closest would be Jefferson County. Once they get them there, they could hold them as long as required to work through the federal process. But if the person, if they've already had an order of removal entered, and then they can just put them on a plane the next day and
Gotcha.
send them back to their home country. They do have some due process rights, and if they're challenging a removal or something like that, they categorize their threat level. The high threats go to a detention facility in Las Vegas, is my understanding. Lower threats might be Salt Lake. And then they have a due process before they're removed.
Gotcha. Coming back to, first off, I had no idea. Like, I've known kind of like the specter of, hey, malfunction within our deportation system has been hanging over the country, but I didn't know specifics. I always thought it was literally, look, we have determined this person is here illegally. They've committed a crime. It's go time. Like, they're gonzo. But you're saying that really over the last 4 years under the Biden administration, that was not the case, and that people were here illegally, known here illegally, committing violent crimes or bad crimes, and the federal government literally was just saying, we're not taking them to deport them, and you, the state, you don't have the power to deport them yourself.
Yeah, it would depend on the severity of the crime or the circumstances, but if they didn't have the detention space, they weren't taking them. And the standards were really ramped down. So the biggest hang up in Idaho really was the lack of that detention space and where to move them. And there was such a backlog in the processing of the removals through Las Vegas. They just weren't processing them in a very timely manner, from what I understand. And so, yeah, they were just being held either in Las Vegas or they would parole them back into society.
And then just tell
Give
them,
them a court date.
You have to come back at some date in the future.
Right.
Do you have any idea how far out those court dates were?
I don't know. No, not near.
Come back in 12 months.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I don't know.
Okay. So back to the compromise bill. Now, was the compromise bill intended to merge the House bill and the Senate bill and take out the best of both of them? Because again, what you were saying is, all right, look, let's get rid of the most offensive or likely to be held up in court aspect of the removal. Let's take away the ability to have like a wiggle room here as far as, mandatory and then non-mandatory portion of your sentence in the absence of just straight deportation. But what happened to the additional law that got volleyed against people for being here illegally and committing a crime?
That's gone in the compromise bill, because in the compromise bill, they're just going to have the offense of illegal entry. So if you're found here and you don't have lawful status, you're here illegally. And that's going to be a crime regardless of the level of other offenses you've had. The compromise that was made was, rather than under the Senate bill, it was a dangerous illegal alien. They'd committed a dangerous crime like a felony.
Yeah.
Under the House bill, it started at House Bill 11 with no standard, just anybody. Could be
found here
running a red light or speeding.
Sure.
So the compromise was to meet in the middle, so to speak, with saying what they would have to have committed some other underlying criminal offense under Titles 18 or 37. And so that was the compromise the two chambers made. And then they kept in the trafficking bill as well, or the trafficking language, I should say. Yeah. So, from my perspective, we were, our concern is from agriculture is the mass roundup and removal of a labor force that we've fallen into over 40 years of failure to have an immigration program for a visa program for our labor. And so to remove all that labor over a short period of time would be disastrous to Idaho's agriculture, Idaho's industry.
Right. And you're not saying, hey, to remove violent criminals would be a problem. You're like, hey, get rid of all them people.
None of us want them.
Yeah, right.
We don't want people that are here committing crimes against our people or our property. They, and if they're here illegally and they're doing into bad behavior, then let's remove them. And I think that is something everyone can agree on both sides of the aisle. And I would hope we could all agree on that. People that are here and they've not been properly admitted into our country and they're just here causing trouble, they should be targeted for removal. Whereas the people that are here just keeping their nose down and doing their own thing and following the law and helping to contribute to our economy, let's leave them alone for the time being. There will come a time, I think, in the next 4 years, we're going to have to figure out what are we going to do with that with that segment, right? But it's really a federal policy issue, not a state policy issue.
Right. There's nothing we could do
No.
in the state of Idaho with Idaho laws and the Idaho, purview where it's like, okay, you have some capacity to have some alternate U.S. either citizenry or green card system, legal. Like that's not our jam. Like we are just beholden to whatever the federal government says is right and wrong.
And so there's another bill that rolled out from Representative Jaron Crane and Britt Raybould that would create a state guest worker permit or guest worker program. But it's not a visa program, right? It's not being created by the federal government. So obviously it's going to be unconstitutional, but it raises a really good idea and prospect, and something that we in agriculture intend to explore. It's not going to move this year, but it gives us a thought, like, can we go back to D.C., meet with the powers that be, and see what if states had a little more power and authority in this arena? We're a federalism system, state and federal government. States can sometimes be pilot programs to determine what's good, does it work, and how could it be implemented nationally. So we're thinking we can go back to D.C. under the Crane-Raybould bill concept and see, can we get permission from the federal government to create a state agriculture guest worker permit? And a person would be able to come and do work legally under that program and then administered by our Department of Labor. And let's do it as a pilot program. See if it works. If it works, implement it nationally. But why can't states try to be the breeding grounds for new ways to regulate labor?
I do not understand how all of the nuances of the legal system between state and federal work. When I was younger and we, in my former state of California, we voted in medicinal marijuana. What I found interesting is that people were like, yeah, it's still legal federally. I'm like, I don't understand what you mean. Right. Because again, it didn't quite understand. But the bottom line was California wasn't going to stop dispensaries and things like that. But obviously, federally people, the FBI came in and occasionally did busts and tons of cash, because you obviously have to deal in cash when you were dealing in that industry at that time. If Idaho passed a guest worker law, then essentially ICE would say like, hey, we still have to abide by the federal regulations. Yep. But if we had a guest worker law in place, then would it be the kind of thing where like law enforcement wouldn't alert ICE? I mean, I'm not proposing Idaho become a sanctuary city, but would that essentially be the situation, which is, look, this person is an Idaho guest worker, and although they might be illegal federally, then but we're not alerting the federal government in the absence of a violent crime or something like that.
Yeah, I think to make it work, we have to get federal buy-in on it and federal authorization.
Because it would be too complex to have two different sets and then telling our law enforcement to engage in follow federal guidelines in one way but not in another way.
Right, exactly. And if you look at the Crane and Raybould bill, what it did is it said we're going to create a guest worker permit. The only people that can get it are people that are not in the country lawfully. Well, immediately, I mean, if I were a farmer and somebody came to me with that permit, I couldn't hire them because under federal law, I can't knowingly hire somebody who's in the country illegally. And if the permit is only issued to somebody here illegally, then I would be hiring a known illegal. So it wouldn't work. But it does raise the discussion and creates, makes the mind spin. Like, what are some creative, out of the box ways that we can address this? Because Congress for 40 plus years can't figure it out. It's such a political hot button issue nationally, raises lots of money for both parties. I blame both parties that they don't want to fix it. Right?
Wait, what do you mean it raises money for both parties?
The campaigning on the immigration issue.
Wait, how do they, okay. Help me understand this. Yeah. So say I'm a wannabe politician. Okay. And I'm like, hey, I should campaign on fixing immigration. So then I go to like immigrant workforce associations like Bodega or whatever. And I say, hey, I'm going to fix this, support my campaign. And I'm going to go to Washington and I'm going to figure out a way to, essentially bring everybody out of the weeds and make sure that they're, taken care of.
And so that would be the left would be campaigning on that theory, where the right's campaigning on the theory of, we have all these people here illegally. They're criminals. They're bad guys. They've come over the border in the secret of the night, and I'm going to go be tough on crime, and I'm going to put that down. So vote for me. And both sides are raising lots of money. But if they fix the problem, they lose that as a talking point, don't they?
Man, I had somebody who was running for Ada County Commissioner, like, I think it was in 23 or something, maybe in 24. I can't remember exactly when. Maybe it was beginning of 24 in the primaries. But he brought up that exact thing. And I was like, I couldn't understand. I'm like, what do you mean? Like, where's this? Because I had done several interviews with law enforcement. I'm like, these people are not talking about it, but it makes perfect sense now. It's like, no, this is the talking point that people bring to the table, that they're going to fix this thing.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I mean, our position from the agriculture industry has been pretty straightforward, that at the federal level, what we want border security. We want internal security. We want people to come into the country or legally, I should say, but we want a good, open door. We're fine with a wall, but with a good door. And for a good door, that means we need a robust guest worker visa program. Because if we're not going to import our labor to grow our food, we're going to have to import our food to feed our population. And it's a matter, where do you want your food produced? Here in our borders or outside our borders? You go to a country like Japan, if they got sideways with us, we could shut down their food supply overnight, and they'd have a huge population in danger. But if you import your labor and you have a national crisis, you can close your borders. Your labor stays here. You keep producing your food. Seems like a better policy for the nation. So we've wanted a robust guest worker visa program that, what we've asked for is a 3-year guest worker visa that would apply to all agriculture rather than the current 9-month temporary visa that only temporary job, so for temporary labor only. Year-round, livestock operations can't use the H-2A visa.
Yeah, so makes sense.
So we want that. And then there's a population that's here currently illegally. We want a process for them to be legalized. They should have to pay a penalty, just like we have to pay a penalty when we break the law. We speed, we pay a fine. They should pay a fine, or make some atonement for their illegal entry, and we're fine with that. But that's basically our 3 things: is a secure border, a guest worker visa program, and a legalization of the current workforce with a punishment.
Man, that seems reasonable.
It seems reasonable, but like I say,
there's a lot of money that you lose if you fix it.
Lots of politics involved.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. For these 2, is there anything that we're missing or any other issues?
I think the only other thing I didn't talk on that bill is that there is also a sentencing enhancement provision. So if an illegal alien commits a felony offense or a drug offense while here in our state, we're going to make a 5-year mandatory minimum. That's what the bill does. Beyond that, I think we've covered pretty broadly what it does. Do
you think the mandatory minimum would be an appropriate thing to add in?
It's in there now. I think it's appropriate because what we're trying to do is, what the whole purpose of this bill is to dissuade criminal behavior, right? And so by raising that penalty, you make it more likely that a person, if they've been removed, that they won't come back, because that's been one of the biggest problems. Has been, you might deport a person, get them over the boat back to Mexico, and then they're back within a week. But if they come back, they might be less likely to come to Idaho if they know there'd be a 5-year minimum.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah.
Awesome. David, I recognize it's a work day.
Yeah.
I really appreciate you coming and explaining this. I would love to at the end of the session do a wrap up with you about what does come to pass, because this is a really important thing. People are paying attention to it. Obviously, we have, like, we lead the country in dairy. Like, this is a real consideration. And yeah, we need stronger borders. Obviously, that's been a big federal talking point, and it looks like there are things that are ramping up to take care of, getting rid of deporting violent criminals and things like that. But again, we need to find a resolution that's like an Idaho solution.
Right.
Yeah. So please do come back. I really appreciate you. Thank you for sharing the information with me today.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. Great.